No one needs to know that you are changing. Moreover, the more silent your transformation is, the more profound it will be. Carl Jung said that true order is born within, when the unconscious and the conscious finally stop fighting. And that's why so many people are always tired. They try to organize their lives externally, while chaos continues to scream inside. Have you ever noticed that the more someone tries to look good, the more lost they seem to be? This happens because the disorganization of the soul isn't fixed with schedules, but with presence. Spirituality begins when you decide to stop showing off progress and start taking care of what no one sees. It is in this silence that life changes, not when the world applauds, but when you listen to yourself. These 10 psychological rules by Carl Jung are not for those seeking magic formulas, but for those ready to rebuild their own minds brick by brick, habit by habit. They are principles that unite psychology and spirituality, ego and self, shadow and consciousness. If you apply this, you won't need to prove anything to anyone. Your peace will speak for itself. Organizing one's life is more than creating lists and following schedules. It's a silent act of spiritual courage. Carl Jung said that true order is born from the encounter between the conscious and the unconscious, between who we pretend to be and who we really are. When a person decides to put their life in order, they are, in fact, beginning the process of individuation, the integration of the parts of the soul that live in conflict. It's curious to note that the more someone tries to appear organized to others, the more disorganized they tend to be inside. True organization happens invisibly. In that instant, when the individual recognizes their own chaos and decides to transform it, without an audience, without fanfare. It's the kind of change that doesn't need to be explained because it speaks for itself. It's like cleaning a dark room that has been forgotten for years. There's dust, there are memories, there's resistance. But when the light enters, the space begins to breathe. The same happens with the mind. Spirituality in this context is not a distant retreat, but an internal movement of those who have learned that organizing oneself is, above all, reconciling oneself with one's own shadow. In a world obsessed with productivity, few realize that disorganization isn't solved with more spreadsheets, but with more awareness. Carl Jung understood that the ego tries to control external chaos precisely to avoid dealing with internal chaos. A person who constantly wastes time, accumulates tasks, or repeats patterns is actually trying to escape something within themselves. And this escape takes many forms: cell phones, overwork, repetitive relationships. True organization isn't an effort against chaos, but a dialogue with it. It's when the individual learns to listen to the silence and allow the self, the center of the psyche, to begin guiding their choices. Small daily rituals help in this process. Waking up a few minutes before the world, taking a deep breath, writing thoughts in a notebook, observing emotions without judging them. All of this is applied self-knowledge. These are simple gestures, but profoundly transformative, because each act of presence is a way of saying to the unconscious, I am here, willing to understand myself. And it is at this moment that life begins to align, not through control, but through coherence. Anyone who has tried to change their life knows that the difficult part isn't starting, but sustaining the movement. For Jung, organization is a construction of the soul, built at the same pace as nature, slow but inevitable. Patience is needed to accept that the unconscious doesn't obey haste. It manifests itself in the time of maturation, in the consistency of small habits, and in the silent commitment of those who want to become whole. The person who organizes themselves spiritually begins to see that the mess around them is merely an echo of what hasn't been looked at within themselves. When they decide to align their thoughts, emotions, and attitudes, the world begins to respond differently. It's as if the universe recognizes the new frequency and says, "Now you are ready." And at that point, organization ceases to be a task and becomes an art, the art of living with purpose, presence, and inner structure. Ultimately, those who organize themselves don't seek control, they seek freedom. And this freedom is the portal that leads to the next step of individuation. Understanding that all external chaos is merely a reflection of what still yearns for light within the soul. When Carl Jung said that whatever we do not confront within ourselves, we end up encountering as our destiny, he was accurately describing what we call external chaos today. Disorganized life, tumultuous relationships, cycles of self-sabotage. None of this is random. They are symbolic manifestations of the psyche trying to be heard. The disorder of the world is merely a mirror of what has not yet been embraced in the unconscious. This is why a person can change cities, jobs, or partners and still find themselves facing the same conflicts. Because it is not the scenery that is broken, it is the reflection. When the unconscious tries to communicate and is ignored, it finds creative ways to scream. An accident, an emotional crisis, a repeating pattern. These events are not punishments, but invitations, spiritual reminders that there is something in disarray asking for light. Jung called this phenomenon projection. Everything we repress within ourselves ends up being projected onto the outside world, like a psychic mirror of the soul. Chaos, therefore, is not the enemy. It is the messenger. It is the language of the self, trying to reorganize what the ego insists on hiding under the rug of control. A simple example: imagine someone who constantly complains about the disorganization of their home, but spends their days in mental turmoil. The physical mess is merely the materialization of psychic confusion. When this person decides to clean a room attentively, without distractions, they begin, without realizing it, to clean their mind as well. Spirituality in this sense is practice, not concept. It is perceiving the sacred in every seemingly mundane action. Carl Jung saw daily life as a stage of symbols, and each gesture of external organization can become a ritual of internal alignment. When someone decides to review their finances, establish priorities, or create a coherent routine, they are, in fact, rebuilding the bridge between ego and unconscious. Self-knowledge begins when the individual stops blaming the world and begins to decipher what the world is mirroring. Because life doesn't repeat situations by chance, it repeats until the lesson is learned. And when it is understood, the scenario changes on its own. It is at that moment that chaos ceases to be noise and transforms into a map. But there's a detail that few realize. Psychic disorder manifests not only in visible confusion, but also in excessive control. The person who tries to dominate everything, foresee every detail, and stifle any uncertainty often lives under the same chaos, only disguised as rigidity. Carl Jung called this compensation. The unconscious seeks balance, and when the ego tries to control too much, it creates situations that force it to let go. That's why life sometimes dismantles what seemed solid, not to punish, but to teach flexibility. Inner organization doesn't arise from imposition, but from listening. True balance emerges when one learns to observe chaos with curiosity, not fear. It's sitting before one's own shadow and saying, "I see you," because only what is looked at can be transformed. When a person begins to practice this type of observation, without judgment, without escape, the unconscious stops sabotaging and begins to cooperate. Chaos then fulfills its role and dissolves, opening space for a new way of living, lighter, more lucid, and profoundly spiritual. Few people understand the symbolic power of dawn. Carl Jung saw the beginning of the day as a mirror of the soul, a sacred moment when the unconscious is still open. and the ego has not yet fully regained control. In this brief interval between sleep and the world, spirituality manifests itself in its purest form, silence. It is in this state of stillness that the self, that deep instance that organizes the psyche, whispers directions that the noise of routine usually muffles. Morning presence is therefore a ritual of returning to essence. When someone wakes up and, before touching their cell phone, decides to breathe consciously, look out the window, and acknowledge the privilege of being alive, they are practicing self-knowledge in its simplest and most powerful form. It's not about religiosity, it's about presence. Jung believed that how we begin the day defines the relationship we will have with the unconscious. If we wake up rushing, reacting, we get lost in chaos. If we wake up in silence, listening, we connect to the center. What we call spiritual discipline is nothing more than the commitment to not surrender the first hours of the day to the noise of the world, but to listening to the soul. Imagine, for example, someone who transforms their morning into a symbolic ritual, lighting a candle, calmly preparing coffee, writing 3 lines about their feelings, or simply observing their breathing. This seemingly banal gesture is, for Carl Jung's psychology, a form of dialogue with the unconscious. It's like sending a message to one's own soul saying, "I am willing to listen to you before obeying the world." Practical spirituality lives in these details. It's not necessary to meditate for hours or escape to an isolated retreat. A few minutes of stillness are enough to align what is deepest within us. Jung called this the individuation process in action. Each conscious choice for presence is a step towards the self. The person who learns to reconnect in the morning becomes less reactive, more intuitive, and begins to perceive subtle synchronicities throughout the day. It's as if the universe responds to the vibration of someone who awakens with inner clarity. This attunement is not mystical, it's psychological. The unconscious organizes itself when the ego quiets down. And in that state, intuition ceases to be a distant whisper and becomes a living compass. There is something profoundly transformative about starting the day with intention. Those who do this realize that time expands, emotions become more stable, and decisions become more conscious. The mind, which previously chased after stimuli, begins to observe. And in this observation, true psychological and spiritual power is born. Carl Jung said that the self doesn't shout, it speaks softly, and that's why few hear it. Mornings are its secret language. When someone awakens and chooses silence, they create an inner space where the unconscious can send answers through symbols, ideas, and subtle perceptions. This is the kind of wisdom that isn't learned from books, but from the direct experience of being present. The person who cultivates this practice notices real changes. Conflicts diminish, anxiety weakens, and a feeling of grounding begins to emerge. It's not magic, it's psychology applied to everyday life. Awakening becomes a portal to individuation, and each morning a new chance to remember who you are. But this balance is only maintained when we learn to protect what silence reveals, which inevitably leads us to the next principle, the power to reduce distractions to protect the soul. Carl Jung said that the unconscious speaks in symbols, but few manage to hear it because they live immersed in noise. The noise of the modern world is not just auditory, it's psychological. It consists of incessant notifications, shallow conversations, invented emergencies and thoughts that collide. And amidst all this, silence has become almost a luxury. But it is precisely in silence that the self resides, the organizing center of the psyche. True spirituality begins when someone decides to disconnect from excess in order to reconnect with the essential. Reducing distractions is not an escape from reality. It's a way of preserving it. It's understanding that each stimulus absorbed unconsciously occupies space within the mind, contaminating self-knowledge and weakening psychic energy. Jung called this ego inflation, when the individual identifies too much with what is outside and loses contact with what is inside. The price of this dispersion is high: anxiety, chronic boredom, a feeling of emptiness, and the inability to be with oneself. Protecting attention, therefore, is protecting the soul. It is an act of spiritual rebellion against a world that profits from our distraction. Imagine someone who spends their day alternating between social media, banal conversations, and automatic tasks, and at night wonders why they feel so disconnected. This is the new form of collective imprisonment, the mind hijacked by constant stimulation. Carl Jung, if he were alive today, would probably say that the greatest challenge of individuation is no longer facing inner demons, but resisting external fragmentation. The person who doesn't master focus becomes the host of 1,000 voices, and none of them is their own. Reducing distractions, then, is an exercise of psychological and spiritual power. It's when you say, "I choose what enters my consciousness," and that changes everything. Creating small rituals of silence, like turning off your cell phone for an hour, walking without music, observing your breath, or writing by hand, is more than self-care. It's rebuilding the bridge with the unconscious. In this space, intuition awakens, ideas take shape, and the shadow begins to reveal itself more clearly. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects what the noise hid. The soul at last finds space to breathe. But the decision to disconnect requires courage, because silence also exposes. Those who shut out external noise inevitably encounter internal noise, and that's where the real spiritual work begins. Jung taught that the unconscious cannot tolerate emptiness. It fills it with everything that has been repressed. This is why many people fear silence. In it, memories, fears, and truths that were dormant emerge. However, it is precisely this encounter that heals. The person who remains present, even in the face of discomfort, begins to transform internal noise into understanding. Over time, the mind calms, the body slows down, and a serene clarity takes the place of restlessness. Reducing distractions is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of listening. And those who learn to listen to what comes from within begin to see the world with different eyes, more attentive, more lucid, more compassionate. At this point, life begins to simplify naturally, revealing a profound principle that Jung knew well. The superfluous is merely the disguised shadow of necessity. Carl Jung said that everything we deny in ourselves returns to life in another form, and superfluity is one of the most subtle. We live surrounded by excesses that at first glance seem like comfort, but which actually hide the unconscious attempt to fill inner voids. We buy what we don't need, accumulate unnecessary tasks, seek attention disguised as productivity. But deep down, superfluity is just the shadow asking to be seen. True spirituality begins when the individual has the courage to look at the accumulation and ask, what within me is trying to be filled from the outside? This question is a portal to self-knowledge. Jung saw excessive consumption, material, emotional, or informational, as a defense mechanism of the ego against silence. Excess, after all, makes noise. It prevents the soul from speaking. That's why many people feel suffocated even when surrounded by comfort. Life becomes heavy because it is full of soulless things. Individuation in this context is a process of purification, separating the gold from the dross, the essential from the noise, authentic desire from unconscious compulsion. Depth psychology teaches that superfluity manifests itself on all levels: physical, mental, and spiritual. On the physical plane, it appears in disorder, in objects kept out of attachment, in clothes we never wear but keep for safety. And dashu, on the mental plane, It expresses itself in repetitive worries, constant comparisons, and the difficulty of silencing the mind. And on the spiritual plane, it arises as attachment to practices or beliefs that no longer serve us, but which we maintain for fear of losing our identity. Jung said that the unconscious is wise. It creates symptoms to warn us that we are out of balance. Excess is one of these symptoms. The person who feels they need more all the time is actually distancing themselves from the self. When they begin to simplify, not just their environment, but their thoughts, something magical happens. Vital energy returns. Silence, previously avoided, becomes a refuge. Spirituality ceases to be an escape and becomes a presence. And at that moment, the individual discovers that living with less is not impoverishment, but liberation from the prison of illusion. Simplifying life is an act of rebellion against the culture of accumulation. Carl Jung saw detachment as a higher form of consciousness. When the ego releases what is unnecessary, the unconscious can finally reveal what is essential. And the essential is never too much. It's just enough. A practical example is the exercise of reviewing one's own space and asking symbolic questions. Does this represent me? Does this nourish me? Does this bind me or expand me? Each sincere answer is a form of self-knowledge. Applied spirituality lives in these everyday gestures. When someone decides to donate clothes, reduce commitments, or clean up their digital environment, they are, in fact, reorganizing their own unconscious. The soul needs space to breathe, and the superfluous is the weight that prevents flight. Jung said that the shadow doesn't disappear, it is integrated. And integrating means recognizing that the desire to possess was often the desire to be seen, loved, validated. When this need is embraced and understood, accumulation loses its meaning. From then on, life becomes lighter, more coherent, and quieter. And it is in this silence that the power to say no is born. The power to create boundaries that protect what truly matters. Carl Jung used to say that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And part of that light is born when we learn to set boundaries. Many people confuse spirituality with passivity, thinking that being a good person means always being available, always saying yes, always understanding others. But a constant yes is a sophisticated form of self-denial. Healthy boundaries are not walls, they are conscious bridges. They define where the other ends and where the self begins. The strengthened ego, contrary to what is thought, is not the inflated ego. It is the structured ego, capable of sustaining its individuality without needing to hurt anyone. Jung saw the ego as the organizer of consciousness. Without it, there is no focus, no identity, no structure for individuation to happen. Therefore, learning to say no calmly is an act of mature love for oneself. When the individual respects themselves, the unconscious understands the message. Now there is an adult in charge. And it is from this maturity that the spiritual process begins to take root. In practice, boundaries manifest themselves in the small choices of daily life. It's the professional who decides to end their workday on time to preserve their mental health. It's the woman who learns to refuse relationships that drain her emotional energy. It's the student who understands that productivity without rest is self-sabotage disguised as discipline. Each consciously uttered no is a symbolic declaration to the universe that your energy is sacred. Carl Jung would say that this is the ego's highest function, to protect the space where the self can flourish. A weakened ego gets lost trying to please the world. A mature ego knows how to serve the soul. And serving the soul requires clarity. When you establish boundaries, you don't push people away. You simply make it clear that the relationship needs to be built on mutual respect. This type of energy is magnetic. It attracts those who vibrate at the same frequency of authenticity and repels what no longer resonates. And so, naturally, life reorganizes itself around a new psychic center, more coherent, more tranquil, and profoundly spiritual. However, the challenge lies not in understanding the concept of boundaries, but in upholding them. The world constantly tests our boundaries. People accustomed to our old version will try to push back the old patterns, and that's where individuation proves itself. Carl Jung said that true growth happens when we remain true to our truth, even in the face of external pressure. Maintaining boundaries is a daily exercise in presence and self-knowledge. It means listening to the inner silence and deciding at each moment what serves us and what no longer serves us. It's a dance between empathy and firmness, between compassion and self-care. Spirituality at this point becomes practical. It's not about meditating in peace, it's about remaining centered amidst the noise. The strengthened ego is the guardian of the inner temple. It allows the soul to expand without getting lost. And when that happens, the individual feels a new kind of peace, not the artificial peace of pleasing everyone, but the real serenity of someone who is whole inside. This serenity is the prelude to the next step, reconciling with one's own shadow, the space where true peace is born. Most people believe that peace is the result of the absence of conflict. Carl Jung saw the opposite. He believed that true peace is born precisely from confrontation with what we have been taught to hide. The shadow for Jung is the sum of everything we reject in ourselves. The impulses, the fears, the emotions that don't match the image we try to maintain. When we deny these aspects, we create a psychic imbalance that manifests itself in irritations, judgments, and even illnesses. Shallow spirituality tries to erase the shadow. Deep spirituality tries to illuminate it. And illuminating is not eliminating, it is understanding. It is having the courage to look inside and admit, yes, there is anger, there is jealousy, there is pride, there is neediness. This doesn't make anyone weak, it makes everyone human. Self-knowledge begins when a person stops fighting against themselves and begins to listen to themselves honestly. Jung said that what we deny dominates us, what we accept transforms us. The shadow is the secret key to balance, the guardian of creative potential and emotional integrity. Reconciling with her is the first step towards a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, but on inner truth. Imagine someone who spends their life trying to be good all the time, understanding, kind, spiritual, but who deep down feels a constant weight, a repressed anger, a silent exhaustion. This person isn't bad, they're just disconnected from parts of themselves. When they finally allow themselves to feel what they've been denying, something inside reorganizes itself. Fear gives way to clarity, and tension dissolves. Jung saw this movement as a sacred act, the descent into the darkness of the soul. It is in the dive, not in the escape, that the light is found. The shadow holds treasures, intuition, strength, authenticity. But these only emerge when we stop trying to be perfect. Perfection for Jung is an illusion of the ego. Wholeness is the purpose of the soul. When the individual accepts their contradictions, they stop living under masks and begin to act with integrity. The shadow then ceases to be an enemy and becomes a silent ally. Each emotion embraced, each failure forgiven, is a fragment of the soul returning home, and this inner reconciliation is what produces a solid peace, one that no one can take away. True peace, therefore, is not the superficial calm that comes from avoiding conflict, but the profound serenity that arises from facing it consciously. Carl Jung said that the soul does not seek comfort, it seeks wholeness. When we understand this, spirituality ceases to be a refuge and becomes a field of integration. Inner silence is no longer emptiness, but presence. The ego, once anxious, learns to serve the self. And the individual begins to live with a new lightness, the fruit of accepting that light and shadow walk together. This is the psychic maturity that the modern world tries to replace with artificial positivism. But whoever truly reconciles with their shadow does not need to appear at peace. They are peace. This serenity is not flaunted, it is felt, and it does not come from outside, but from the profound alignment between the conscious and the unconscious. When this happens, the human being ceases to react to the world and begins to respond to it with wisdom. And this wisdom naturally leads them to the next stage of the journey, regaining control of attention and living with purpose, so that the mind serves the soul and not the other way around. Carl Jung believed that what you direct your attention to becomes the foundation of your reality. Attention is the fuel of consciousness, and the unconscious feeds precisely on what we let pass unnoticed. Therefore, living in a scattered way is living without psychic control. The modern world is designed to hijack the mind. Notifications, visual stimuli, constant comparisons. The result is a fragmented ego, without focus, always reacting and rarely choosing. Regaining control of attention is therefore a spiritual act. It is saying to one's own soul, I choose what inhabits me. And this decision marks the beginning of true individuation, when the individual stops being manipulated by the collective unconscious and begins to respond to the call of the self. Spirituality is not about escaping the world. It is about learning to navigate it without getting lost. Silence, in this context, is a tool of power. When the mind quiets down, consciousness expands. The person who practices presence realizes that everything that previously seemed urgent is, in fact, irrelevant, and what really matters is revealed in simplicity. Attention is a form of sacred energy, and how we use it defines the kind of life we create. Carl Jung said, "You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And becoming conscious requires focus. When the mind is left without direction, it reverts to repeating old patterns: fear, guilt, comparison, emptiness. Presence breaks this cycle. A simple practice is to start the day by choosing where to focus your gaze. Instead of immersing yourself in social media, choose to observe the sky, your breath, your own body. It seems small, but it's profound. Attention is the channel through which the unconscious manifests itself. The more conscious it becomes, the more symbolic and rich life becomes. Jung saw purpose as a natural expression of the self, not a goal to be achieved, but an inner voice to be heard. When you silence the external noise, this voice becomes clear. And what was once doubt transforms into direction. Purpose is not created, it is remembered. It has always been there, waiting for the moment when the mind makes room for the soul to speak. Taking control of one's attention is the same as reclaiming sovereignty over one's own existence. It is choosing not to be a product of circumstances, but the author of one's own narrative. Jung saw this as the culmination of individuation, the moment when the individual becomes aware of what moves them and begins to live in coherence with their inner truth. To live with purpose, then, is to align the ego with the self, thinking with feeling, doing with being. It is to transform the everyday into alchemy. Each conscious choice, each nurtured thought, each cultivated silence becomes a brick in the construction of a meaningful life. And it is this meaning that heals. The person who learns to govern their own attention begins to live in a state of presence, no longer reacting to the world, but creating from within. Time ceases to be an escape and becomes space. Actions cease to be obligations and become expressions of being. At this point, spirituality and psychology merge, revealing true power. to live intentionally, with clarity, with purpose, with soul. Because in the end, mastering attention is mastering destiny, and it is in this silent mastery that real transformation becomes possible. Life doesn't change when you understand, it changes when you decide. Carl Jung said that nothing transforms until the unconscious becomes conscious. And now that you understand this, the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you go back to autopilot? Or will you begin to build your inner order, stone by stone, silence by silence? The world is full of people seeking light, but running from their own shadow. Only those who have the courage to look inward find true balance. It's not about controlling everything. It's about aligning yourself with what is essential. Because, in the end, organization isn't aesthetic, it's spiritual. It's how you honor your own soul. So tell me, what's the first step you're going to take today to organize your life from the inside out? Write in the comments. And if this video sparked something in you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every week, we learn to transform chaos into awareness, fear into strength, and silence into power.